Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Japan Politics Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Whittaker, and I'm very happy to say we're joined now on the show by the first ever guest we've had on the Japan Politics Podcast, and that is Quin Cho. Now, he's a historian and published author. He's written on the subject of Japan before. He's written the book Competing Empires in Burma, among other works. And he's on here today to discuss the fact that he's recently brought out, or is in the process of bringing out, a new book on the subject of the Manchurian railway crisis. And so we're going to dive into that and have a bit of discussion about it. So Quin Cho, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, it's very good of you to come on, Quin. Now, people might be wondering why a show mostly focused on contemporary Japanese politics would be discussing an historical event like the Manchurian railway crisis. But I'm hoping we'll be able to show over the course of the show just how significant this event was and the ripple effects it had at the time, and how it still is impactful and is worth thinking about in how we view Japanese politics today. So I was wondering if you could tell us, sort of roughly in your own words, what the Manchurian railway crisis was, and just give us a brief summary, please.
So the Kwantung Army, which is a Japanese army that was based in the Liaodong Peninsula in Manchuria throughout the 1920s, took it upon itself to take unilateral actions to defend Japan's special rights and interests in the region, which it acquired in various wars of aggression against China in previous decades. And the Kwantung Army by 1931 was very much determined to absorb Manchuria into the empire, because of the resources that were there, such as coal and iron, and also because of the land that was available and could help, that some of the Kwantung Army officers believed could help remedy Japan's economic problems and crisis that was ongoing with the Great Depression. So from about 1929 on forward, you have two Kwantung Army field officers, a fellow by the name of Ishiwara Kanji and another guy by the name of Itagaki Seishiro, who planned a false flag attack on the Japanese-owned South Manchuria Railway. They planned this attack for the better part of 2 years with the participation of other Kwantung Army staff officers, but without the knowledge of many people in the Japanese government and Army Ministry and General Staff, and even their own immediate superior commander, who by September 1931 was a fellow by the name of Honjo Shigeru. The thorough planning of the attack led to its rapid implementation and swift execution on September the 18th, 1931. There was a spot near the Beidai barracks where the plotters had selected. They blew up the railway, and then at around 10 to 10:30 p.m. and used the false flag attack as an excuse to assault the nearby North Barracks, where forces of Chinese warlord Zhang Xueliang's army were garrisoned. They seized the barracks, and then over the subsequent days and months, expanded the incident into the rest of northeastern China, and until they eventually conquered the entire region by February of 1932.
Thank you, Quin. That's a really good summary. It's interesting that both Japan felt the need to use a false flag in order to sort of usher in this new expansion, and also simultaneously Germany in World War II much later would use sort of similar tactics in Poland. Do you think it's largely because of the disconnected sort of command structure, where things weren't sort of centrally ordered, but it was sort of officers with various degrees of maybe superiors knowing that they have felt the need to use this false flag?
To some extent, it is related to that predicament, which the Imperial Japanese Army was quite steeped in. You had in Japanese, there's a term called gekokujo, which means something along the lines of the lower overcoming the higher. And the Kwantung Army really are the chief and ultimate practitioners of this gekokujo, with the Mukden incident or the Manchurian incident being the primary incident in which the gekokujo was embodied by the officers, the staff officers, mind you, of the Kwantung Army, who are not supposed to be policy-making officials. But in terms of the necessity of the false flag, there are also other factors that must be considered. For one thing, it was there was a need for a casus belli, or a cause for war, for the Kwantung Army to invade parts of Manchuria throughout 1931. And the kind of rising tide of Chinese nationalism in the 1920s into 1931 had led to a series of incidents and clashes between the forces of the Japanese Empire, including the Kwantung Army, and the forces of Chinese nationalism. And so the false flag attack on the railway represented an attempt to pin the blame for what the Kwantung Army would pitch as an outrageous or insolent assault by the Chinese, who were said to be disrespecting Japan's treaty rights and interests in the region. And in turn, they hoped that this would win the support of the government in Japan to expand the incident beyond the confines of the Japanese-owned South Manchuria Railway, but also the broader, the understanding, if not endorsement, of the international community, which was in 1931 primarily ensconced in the West, the United States, Great Britain, France, and also the League of Nations, which was founded after the First World War. So the false flag attack, in summary, was necessary because of the need to win international support, or at least the understanding of the international community, to win the support of the government to expand the incident. And yes, also because of the gekokujo and shall we say, muddled command structure and policy-making apparatus that was that defined Japan in 1931.
That's very interesting. That sort of leads into my next question. From the brief amount of research I've done, it seems that there's a bit of a debate, and you mentioned previously there might have been some sort of knowledge from sort of higher up the command chain of the officers who carried out this sort of false flag attack. But I was just wondering if in your research, or generally, you had an opinion as to how high you think this went, if possibly there was any sort of central command knowledge within Japan. Because what I find so interesting about this period is that there's such an element of chaos creating a vacuum. Because from first glances, Japan in some ways appears sort of a modern constitutional state. You know, it has the beginnings of democracy, but so much of Japan's constitutionality is dependent on sort of the emperor, ever since the Meiji Revolution, being the very pinnacle of Japanese politics and normally being in charge of everything. And that created a situation sort of where officers could sort of claim that they were honouring the constitution by saying they were acting, even without direct orders, sort of on the emperor's behalf. And so it's really creates sort of this chaotic vacuum when a very patriotic society where officers can claim they're doing it, what's effectively a mini coup or sort of going off without their commander's approval, and they can claim to the public and to themselves that they're doing it on the emperor's behalf. So I was just wondering if you had an opinion on whether that's a real supreme example of this, or if there was just how high the knowledge and the tacit approval might have gone.
That's a very good question, and as you mentioned, it is still debated into the present day. I think that the answer is rather complicated because what defines Japan's central command at the time is divided into a variety of different entities, which in turn each have their own subdivisions. So, to give a brief overview, you have the government itself, which is primarily embodied in the cabinet, right? You have the army ministry, which is in charge of the administrative affairs of the army. You have the Army General Staff, or AGS, which is primarily in charge of operational planning and intelligence gathering and that sort of in the kind of nitty gritties of warfare, if you will. And then you have the emperor himself and the people in his entourage. So these are the four main entities that define Japan's command and policy-making structure in 1931, at least in Tokyo. And within these entities, the foreknowledge and desire to take action in Manchuria varied. The level of it varied. So within the Army General Staff, there were some within the intelligence section and the operations section who were at least somewhat aware, probably, of the Kwantung Army's intentions and desire to invade Manchuria in 1931. Not everyone in the general staff, indeed most, I would venture to say, necessarily wanted a full-scale invasion and absorption of the entire territory. Some wanted to overthrow Jiang Xueliang, the Chinese warlord in the region, and replace him with a more suitable Japanese puppet. Others wanted to establish maybe an independent or autonomous government in the region, and there were a few who were on board with the Kwantung Army's plans to invade and conquer the entire region. Within the army ministry, you have a fellow by the name of Minami Jiro, who is the army minister, who is the primary and most important figure within the army ministry, because he also holds a place in the cabinet as the army minister. And he was, to some extent, and the sources kind of differ on his views, but I'm of the view that he was trying to kind of play the middle between his more radical subordinates and the people in the government, who I'll get to later on. And he was trying to basically, I guess, try and promote the views of some of his subordinates in certain situations with regards to Manchuria. He did advocate for action in Manchuria and or some kind of action in August of 1931, but he was also somewhat unaware of the Kwantung Army's exact and precise preparations and plans for attacking and trying to absorb the entire region. And there were instances throughout September, October, November, December of 31 that he basically sent cables to the Kwantung Army trying to prevent them from expanding the scope of the incident. Then you have the government. The foremost figure within the government is a guy by the name of Wakatsuki Reijiro, who's the prime minister. You have the foreign minister, who's a fellow named Shidehara Kijuro. And these people primarily opposed the Kwantung Army's expansion into Manchuria, its unilateral measures to implement this expansion, and the attempts to continually enlarge the incident beyond the immediate bounds of the South Manchuria Railway, which was Chinese territory. They issued a non-expansion order on September the 19th after the incident had occurred in the Mukden incident, the false flag attack on the South Manchuria Railway. And even before that, Shidehara and Wakatsuki had made clear their concern with the rumors of the Kwantung Army's plans to Army Minister Minami, and had even got him to send a messenger with a letter indicating their desire not to take action in Manchuria. This letter did not make it through because the messenger was a guy by the name of Tatekawa Yoshitsugu, who was on the operations section of the Army General Staff, and he was whisked away to an inn where he got drunk with another officer in the Kwantung Army, and he never delivered his letter, which contained in a way was a byproduct of the emperor, who met with Minami on September 11th and had told him of his desire to avoid some sort of incident in Manchuria. So to summarize, the emperor and and key figures within the government were both probably unaware of and opposed the Kwantung Army's unilateral activities. They might have heard some rumors, probably did indeed, but were unaware of the exact plans. Some figures within the general staff were at least somewhat aware, others weren't, and their opinions on whether or not and what kind of action to take in Manchuria varied. The Army Ministry, and in particular Army Minister Minami, kind of tried to play the middle in the sense of he advocated somewhat for expanding into Manchuria and before the incident, but kind of as the incident unfolded itself, his kind of position within the cabinet of Wakatsuki obligated him to try and limit the scope of the incident within Manchuria. So it's a very complicated answer, and it's one that would honestly require even more research to do in a totally comprehensive manner.
That was very comprehensive. Thank you. You just said also the keyword I was thinking of when I was imagining the implications of trying to determine something like this, which is rumors. Because I was just thinking, you mentioned Army Command. How on earth do you quantify active supporters versus someone who hears what could be considered a report of these activities in Manchuria, or are they rumors? And how on earth do you distinguish someone who's fairly broadly supportive of these actions in Manchuria but just decides not to pass it up the chain versus someone who's ambivalent or just doesn't want to, in such a chaotic factional atmosphere, create a stink by reporting it, and decides for that reason not to say anything? Like, how could you possibly, even at the time and so much later, determine how many people were aware and just did nothing?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's one that is difficult to answer, certainly, because there's a wealth of primary source material that is difficult to find and or not available. There are a lot of records that were destroyed at the end of the war. There are some sources that are available, but kind of parsing out what everyone in the general staff thought or what everyone in the army ministry or government thought is a somewhat difficult endeavor. Generally speaking, there were some meetings that occurred between certain members of the Kwantung Army and certain members of the general staff in Tokyo. I'm thinking of one specific meeting in June of 1931, where there was a guy that the Kwantung Army sent to Tokyo named Hanaya Tadashi, who tried to gain the support of certain figures on the Army General Staff for the Kwantung Army's invasion of, or soon-to-be invasion of Manchuria. And he was by and large successful. With regards to the rumors, these were circulating especially vociferously in August and September of 1931. And you had, at this point, there were figures such as Shidehara and even the emperor himself who began hearing of these rumors, but they were not really able to rein in the Kwantung Army and its and the plotters of the Manchurian incident. For one thing, the Tatekawa got sidelined in Manchuria and may have even himself tacitly supported the plotters. He had earlier kind of in certain documents indicated a desire to at least take some sort of action in Manchuria, if not a full-scale invasion. And also, they were not exactly aware of the precise timing and nature of the Kwantung Army's plans. The Prime Minister Wakatsuki and Emperor Hirohito himself, and Foreign Minister Shidehara. So even though they heard rumors of the Kwantung Army's activities, the precise details and nature of what they were going to do escaped them. And this was quite critical. They were always reacting to events, right? The Kwantung Army is initiating events. They're essentially kind of the policy-making agent, and the head in the Army General Staff, the Army Ministry, the Cabinet, and the Emperor are left trying to react and just, whether that takes the form of an ex post facto approval for the Kwantung Army's activities or some kind of attempt to suddenly stop expansions of the Mukden incident beyond the immediate area of the South Manchuria Railway. They were always in the passive role, and this was a rather significant problem for Japan going forward in future years, as the Kwantung Army continued to try to expand its influence into other areas of northern China and even the Soviet Union later on.
Fantastic. That was incredibly detailed. Thank you. So to move it on, I've got a little bit more of a broad question, if that's okay. It's sort of a thing that's probably incredibly hard to quantify, but I was just wondering, in your opinion, how politically significant for both Japan and world history you consider the railway incident in Manchuria. I mean, at school, it was, my one memory of this is it was taught as a sort of a very clear sequence of events that led towards World War II. It was the Manchuria railway incident. It was Italy expanding into Africa, into Ethiopia, the rearmament on the Rhineland, as sort of very clear escalating events that led towards World War II, and in particular, the sort of the League of Nations failing to respond to each one in turn. But I sort of got the impression that the further it went along, the harder it was at that point to put the genie back in the bottle. So I was just wondering what your thoughts on how significant it was.
I think it's very significant, personally. I think the Mukden incident and the Manchurian incident is the key step that leads to the Asia-Pacific War. that eventually explodes first in 1937 in China after the Marco Polo Bridge incident and the Second Sino-Japanese War, and then later in 1941 with Japan's Strike South campaign into Southeast Asia against the British Empire and the United States primarily. And that includes also the bombing of Pearl Harbor and all the rest of it that it defined the Pacific theater of World War II. So to kind of go into the details of why that is the case, after the 1931 Mukden incident and the conquest of Manchuria, the Kuomintang Army continues pushing the envelope in northern China because it wants to defend the flank of Manchuria, which it just conquered, and also gain access to more resources in the form of coal and iron deposits in northern China. So in 1933, they invaded Rehe or Yehou province. And then in 1935, they continuously supported regional and ethnic separatism in provinces such as Hebei and Chahar, which is in modern-day Inner Mongolia, the latter of which is modern-day Inner Mongolia, and signed treaties that stripped the Chinese of key aspects of their sovereignty in these places. Then, in 1936, the Kuomintang Army, again, unilaterally, without really the approval of the general staff or the government in Tokyo, supported an Inner Mongolian separatist army to invade the Inner Mongolian province of Suiyuan. While this invasion failed quite spectacularly, it was a contributing factor to Zhang Xueliang, the Chinese warlord in Manchuria, kidnapping Chiang Kai-shek, who is the leader of the KMT in China, the Kuomintang, the Chinese nationalists, who up to that point had been pursuing a first pacification and then resistance policy, which was centered around fighting the communists and the various other warlords in China instead of the Japanese, suppressing them and then turning attention to the Japanese. But because he was not able to defeat these elements, basically what his policy meant in practice was it gave the Kuomintang Army and the Japanese a free hand to continue not expanding not only into Manchuria, but also into northern China. But because of the failed Suiyuan incident, which was in a sense a bridge too far, a province too far, if you will, Zhang Xueliang kidnapped Chiang Kai-shek. He kind of held him at gunpoint and pretty much said that if he didn't cease the Chinese Civil War and form a united front with the communists and the various other warlords in China to resist Japan, that it would be the end for him. And, he agreed to do this, and he did do it. And after 1936, the Chinese were not keen on tolerating continued Japanese incursions into northern China. This eventually led to the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937. And then because the Japanese were not able to defeat China in the 6 months that they assumed they could, their stocks of raw materials began running very low, especially rubber and tin and later oil. And this basically forced Japan to begin considering other options to gain access to these raw materials. And the option that they chose was to invade Southeast Asia, go to war with the British Empire, which held key territories in Southeast Asia, most notably Malaya and Burma, but also go to war with the United States, which had control of the Philippines and also key territories in the Pacific, as well as various commercial and business interests throughout China and the immediate sphere of Asia. So basically, to give a more brief summary, the Mukden incident led to a series of further incidents in northern China, which led to the Second Sino-Japanese War, which eventually leads to World War II in the Asia-Pacific region between Japan and the Allied coalition centered around the United States, China, the British Empire, and in the last days of the war, the Soviet Union.
That's incredibly comprehensive. Thank you. Yeah, so I actually, when asking you that, of course, you're quite right to mention Chiang Kai-shek, because I had in mind the consequences that would lead towards World War II. I hadn't thought about as much how obviously this threat in Manchuria that they were presenting would have led to this kidnapping and him then ultimately to have to focus more on fighting the Japanese. And I suppose you could argue retrospectively that he was debatably right to be so concerned about the threat the communists presented to his position, given that they ultimately won effectively in the Civil War. And also another effect would be that because the Manchurian crisis happened and Japan expanded into China in that way, it was sort of really the cream of, from what I understand, the Chiang Kai-shek's forces were lost, which had such a big impact of him losing that civil war as well. So you could also point to the incredible consequence of it had on China, as well as obviously being that key step along the road towards World War II.
Yeah, so with regards, I mean, in 1931, during the Mukden incident, Chiang Kai-shek actually ordered his forces the forces that were under the command of Jiang Xueliang to not resist the Japanese invasion, on the basis of following the first pacification and resistance policy. To give you an idea of the kind of unpreparedness of Jiang Xueliang's forces, on the night of September 18th, within the North Barracks, which was kind of one of the primary objective that the Kwantung Army plotters, specifically Ishiwara, had designated in their 2 years of planning. The Chinese garrison had the lights on, which illuminated their figures and silhouettes and kind of allowed guided Japanese rifle and small arms fire. And the sentries were actually equipped with dummy rifles. That just kind of goes to show the designed unpreparedness of the Chinese on the night of September 18th and the desire of their commanders to avoid fighting Japan and instead focus on China's internal problems. While there were some instances of resistance, most notably at the Nen River bridges in November 1931, these were somewhat scattered and ineffectual attempts to resist the advance of the Kwantung Army and into Manchuria. And consequently, the Kwantung Army was able to conquer Manchuria relatively easily, despite it being severely outnumbered at the outset of hostilities. The Kwantung Army had somewhere around in the region of 10,000 men or thereabout, and the Jiang Xueliang's forces totaled 250,000, but probably had about 130 to 140,000 in the immediate sphere of Manchuria. So, in summary, the Kwantung Army conquered all of Manchuria, despite being outnumbered by at least more than a factor of 10 to 1. And it's because to a great extent because of the first pacification, then resistance policy.
the mind just sort of baffles because there's just it was such a pivotal moment of the world seems a lot more defined in terms of the boundaries of the world in many ways than the World War II period, and just the roads that could have gone differently. It just sort of baffles the mind, really, doesn't it?
Yes, it's very astounding in a sense. I in my experience, I've had a professor kind of very briefly and I think quite accurately summarize history as the history of going from frontiers to borders. I would say that in a way what Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan and fascist Italy did during the war was they attempted to kind of roll the clock back of history and transition from set borders that were kind of ensconced and encoded in the various treaties after the end of World War I and the League of Nations, the charter of which kind of, supposedly prevented the invasion of other countries within the League. And the fascist countries during World War II, however, disregarded this and attempted to go from borders to frontiers. They basically kind of tried to make this transition.
You mentioned the League of Nations. Just in your opinion, how big was the scale of the challenge? Because they've retroactively, knowing what happened, the League has faced an incredible amount of criticism for not sort of responding more strongly to this incident, despite maybe you could argue... Well, I suppose, would you agree with the assessment that it was very hard to know that it was inevitable that escalation would likely follow? And also, how difficult a position do you think the League of Nations was in? Because I think the major power who might have been in a position, from what I understand, might have been Britain. I'm not sure how realistic it would have been to strongly respond immediately to this. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that, really.
I do. I think the League of Nations was quite honestly a toothless organization that did not have an enforcement mechanism. So that's kind of one deficiency that it had that was a fundamental flaw. And it also, it was, I think, quite clear to a good many people, especially within the American State Department, most notably Secretary of State Henry Stimson, who was getting, pretty good intelligence reports from Manchuria, that the incident, the Mukden incident, was indeed illegitimate, and that the Kwantung Army was probably out of control. I think, as he put it, the situation in Manchuria was not the clash of governments, but the clash of subordinates of governments. I thought that was a very poignant quote when I read it. But even though people, and there were many people who were at least somewhat aware of the Kwantung Army's indiscretion and illegitimate cause for action, the League of Nations did not really act on this knowledge in any meaningful way. They did pass some resolutions in September and December, most notably, that basically mandated that Japan withdraw its forces back to the immediate sphere of the South Manchuria Railway Zone once the dangers to Japanese property and civilians were removed. But the Japanese and the Kwantung Army were never going to really adhere to these demands. They could always formulate more false flag incidents and the like to justify their presence in Manchuria, and basically kind of use the uh, the machinery of the liberal international order to kind of maintain, to justify their continued presence in the region. With regards to the powers that were kind of in position to really do anything about the Kwantung Army's invasion of Manchuria, I don't really think any of them, including Britain, were in a position to do anything. For one thing, with the case of Britain and America, you have tyranny of distance. Manchuria is just too far away to immediately do really much of anything. You also have the fact that Britain and America were in the midst of the Great Depression and had also gone through periods of disarmament in the 1920s. The Soviet Union, for its part, was still enmeshed in pursuing its 5-year plan, its first 5-year plan, which rapidly did, to some extent, achieve a level of industrialization of the USSR, but also was not completed in 1931. And even after the first 5-year plan was completed, there was a second and third 5-year plan that was necessary for the Soviets to eventually be prepared to just fight Germany, let alone Japan. So really, no one was prepared to intervene in Manchuria, not Britain, not America, not the Soviet Union, most certainly not the League of Nations. And the Kwantung Army was well aware of this and had kind of identified the year 1931 as a key time to which they should take action, because they were aware that these entities were all not ready to deal with an invasion of Manchuria.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got one last question on Manchuria, if that's okay. Basically, it's a bit more personal than the others. I was basically wondering, did anything in particular come up when you were researching your book that you didn't expect, or were there sort of any parts of the general crisis that you think are quite interesting that are not as broadly known?
I think that's a good question. In my case, I guess I have learned to expect that history is very, shall we say, interesting discipline, where you shouldn't necessarily expect anything. So I guess I wasn't too surprised by anything I found, but in terms of some of the lesser known elements of the Manchurian incident, I would say that I think that the kind of exact reactions of the general staff and the government are maybe not well known, but also I think the resistance at the Nen River bridges from the Chinese is a very interesting topic, because it kind of went against the first unity and then resistance policy of Chiang Kai-shek, and marked China's first large-scale attempt to resist Japanese aggression. But within Japan, I think there's also an attempt to actually overthrow the government in October 1931, called the October Incident, which was kind of this attempt by a fellow in the so-called Cherry Society, or some fellows, Hashimoto Kingoro being the most notable, to overthrow the Wakatsuki government and try and secure a government that was more friendly to the Kwantung Army and the Imperial Japanese Army in its invasion of Manchuria. This was part of their program of national reconstruction, that was to occur that they wanted to undertake in Japan, and had kind of promoted in various officer discussion groups and secret societies that some of the Kwantung Army plotters were also a part of. Most notably, the Cherry Society is one, and there's other groups such as the Iseki Kai and the Futaba Kai and others. And what you have is basically a kind of an attempt to both change the government at home in October, while also expanding the empire abroad. That's kind of the dual track program of the Imperial Japanese Army radical officers, primarily field officers, so majors and colonels, but also junior officers and more senior officers. This was, I think, a duality that is in a kind of a pairing that is good to know about, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, is there any other aspect of the Manchuria crisis that we haven't discussed that you'd like to maybe talk about a bit?
I mean, in terms of the founding of the puppet state of Manchu Kuo in February 1932, the Japanese managed to coax the last emperor, Puyi, Henry Puyi, who is the subject of the film The Last Emperor, that was made in 1988, and they managed to kind of get him out of the city of Tianjin and get him into Manchuria to serve as the supposed leader of a new regime in the region that would be backed by the guns of the Kwantung Army. And that's the only reason it existed, was because of the Kwantung Army's force and its presence in Manchuria. But the Kwantung Army and the Japanese Empire more generally attempted to use and deploy the sacred figure of Puyi, the last emperor, to achieve their aims for administering, exploiting, and I guess to some developing a military-industrial complex in Manchuria, which had very grave effects for the civilian Chinese population, which was subject to slavery and starvation and a variety of other different afflictions.
Yeah, thank you so much for covering the topics of your book. That's really fascinating. I'd like to move on to asking you a little bit about the society you're involved with. I'm so sorry. Do you mind reminding me the name? It's the Pacific Atrocities
Education. Pacific Atrocities Education.
Thank you so much. I was just wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the function of that society and how you became involved with them, if that's okay.
Of course. So the Pacific Atrocities Education is a non-profit that is dedicated to telling the stories of the Asia-Pacific theater of World War II, which are often glossed over or not really explored in any real detail in America and in the West and the English-speaking world. We try to both promote awareness of the atrocities that the Imperial Japanese Army committed on the Asian mainland during the war, and also kind of explore the various battles, campaigns, and strategies that defined the fighting of the war itself within the Asia-Pacific region. I personally got involved with Pacific Atrocities Education in 2020. It was the summer of the pandemic, and I signed up to work as an intern at the organization and write my first book, and I published it in the summer of 2021. And then, I got the idea along with my, it was my supervisor, Jenny Chan, who's the director of PAE, who helped kind of formulate along with me the idea to write a book about the Kwantung Army, because there wasn't any really existing scholarship in English or even in Chinese or Japanese about the Kwantung Army. And I agreed, and I eventually got a fellowship to continue writing it at the beginning of 2024, and I've completed the book as of 2 days ago and sent it off for final publication. And
congratulations, as an aside.
Yep, it should be released here within a month. So I think PAE is a very good organization that has a lot of good educational tools and information. I highly recommend people check out the website, the PAE website, Pacific Atrocities Education.org, I believe it is off the top of my head, and also the Pacific Atrocities Education YouTube channel, which has a lot of interesting and educational videos, many of which are much more concise than the kind of rather long kind of, I guess, summary of events that I have just given. So if you have less time available, I would highly suggest the PAE YouTube channel.
It went quite quickly for me, but thank you. What really leapt out at me, I mean, there's a lot of interesting and informative stuff from looking at over the PAE website and YouTube channel. What really leapt out as me is very interesting is the fact that they're involved in, I believe, digitizing primary sources and diaries and records. I mean, you mentioned earlier when we were discussing your book how the difficulty, because so much has been lost, of the primary sources and getting together an accurate picture of history. So that struck out to me as an incredibly noble thing, apart from the other work they do as well.
Yes, it's quite tedious, but it is very worthwhile to scan the documents at the National Archives and elsewhere and digitize them. It is, I think, very necessary. A lot of the documents are in poor shape. They're falling apart, and they need to be preserved, in my opinion. So I'm very proud to have participated in that process myself.
And that gives you more information also secured to sort of continue the noble cause of making this area of history a little bit more discussed and informed upon as well.
That's right.
Yeah. I was also going to ask you, if you don't mind, sort of a little bit more of a current day political question, if that's okay. I was just wondering, do you think the political relevance of this work, despite the incredible time that's gone by, I mean, I think we just passed a major anniversary as well, didn't we? Is maybe not increasing, but still sort of incredibly relevant. I mean, I've just written down a list of a few things that have happened recently that sort of came to my head, and this is not a comprehensive list at all, but it's just a few things that have came across my newsfeed or that stood out to me recently. Was, I believe, there's recently the election of the new Korean leader, who said things about the degree of discussion of atrocities in Asia and actions during World War II, and he's said prior to becoming president of Korea, that South Korea, that he was unhappy with the way the Japanese treat the issue and sort of the education within Japan, which possibly, given the importance of the South Korean-Japan relationship, could be something that comes up again and is very politically relevant. And also there's the degree to which different Japanese political leaders address this issue. For example, there's been a big breakthrough recently of Sanseito and the Conservative Party of Japan to a lesser extent. And, for example, Seinai Takeichi at times has been quite close to becoming a potential leader of the Liberal Party of Japan, the LDP, and she's got quite differing views to the Korean president on this issue. And also, there's the the controversial shrine in Japan, the
Yasukuni.
Thank you so much. I did write that down, but I've forgotten the pronunciation. Thank you. That always seems to pop up in the news, and it's sort of a controversial issue where some people opt to visit it and some don't in Japanese politics. And recently, there's been for the anniversary, a few politicians have visited, including the leader of Sanzeto, and also interestingly Koizumi, who you'd maybe not think as much of a right-wing politician of the LDP, was present during those observations. So sorry, that was a very long-winded question, but basically, to give an example, do you think it's still this topic very politically relevant today, despite the length of time that's gone on?
I do think the Manchurian incident and the Asia-Pacific War more generally is highly relevant today, and actually maybe is in a sense even increasing in relevance, believe it or not. I think that in Japan, and I think this is a relatively common view in Korea and China and even elsewhere in Asia, Japan has not really adequately or sufficiently apologized for the atrocities that it committed in Asia, which were quite severe on the scale of what the Nazis did, and perhaps even greater in terms of the kind of the just sheer brutality of some of the atrocities that they committed. If you read about them, it's quite shuddering. But I think within Japan, after the end of the war, the reason that, or one of the reasons that it has not really adequately taken steps to reconcile or apologize for its past actions is because of the survival of key figures that were a part of the Japanese policy-making apparatus and even the army during the war within the post-war Japanese government. So, for instance, you have a fellow by the name of Kishi Nobusuke, who was a key founding member of the Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, in the late 50s, who became the Prime Minister of Japan with help from the American CIA. He was a war criminal who oversaw the formation of a military-industrial complex in Manchuria using slave labor. But he was quite useful for his kind of technical expertise. He kind of brought a system of vertical integration into Manchuria, and the U.S. kind of needed certain figures such as Kishi and others who had been a part of the Japanese Empire's apparatus to administer Japan in the aftermath of the war, maintain its position in the kind of broader Asia-Pacific security apparatus, namely its position as or status within the first island chain, which includes Japan, Okinawa, Taiwan, and Borneo, and the Philippines, which was kind of a chain that was kind of going to be used to try and contain China and the North Korea and the Soviet Union.
My understanding also was that essentially there was a bit of a U-turn where initially there was a sort of a keenness to get these figures who'd been involved in the Second World War administration out of the Japanese government. But then once communism emerged as the sort of the broader concern of the US and the occupying forces, then that U-turn came about when they were sort of welcomed back in, because we need someone who can sort of be a bulwark against the threat of communism.
Yes, that's I would say accurate. At the kind of immediate end of the war, you did in the late 40s, and you did have attempts to democratize Japanese society. I think was the term that was used, and more genuine attempts to kind of limit the power of the zaibatsu and the monopolies. But certainly, I think after the Korean War. I think that was a key, actually seminal moment for Japan as well, and the kind of resuscitation of certain elements within the Japanese government and policy-making apparatus by the U.S. I think that a lot of the kind of wartime figures, their expertise and kind of understandings of things were needed by the U.S. to kind of maintain the position in Asia during the Cold War. And I think that today, you see actually a lot of the direct descendants of these people in Japanese politics. So Abe Shinzo is the grandson of Kishi Nobusuke, for example. Abe Shinzo, of course, was assassinated a few years ago, but the point still remains that the legacy of those that kind of oversaw the Empire of Japan during World War II still remains significant, and I think that the worldview of a lot of these kind of Japanese imperialists has been passed down to the new generation of policymakers, and a lot of the crimes and atrocities that were committed in East Asia are forgotten and not well known in the Japanese public.
Yeah, and I was contemplating how you might sort of see a sea change within Japan, and towards this issue to maybe sort of change the educational stance on this issue. And I'm not by no means a Japanese politics expert, but I was just sort of struggling to envision it in the short term. So I suppose it sort of comes down to discussing it and the work of organizations like the Pacific Atrocities Education to sort of bring this into the limelight and public discussion a bit more.
That's right.
But yeah, thank you so much for that answer. That was incredibly informative. That's really all I had on asking you about PAE. Is there anything more you'd like to say on the topic, or anything we've maybe
check out the website. You can see a lot of informative blog posts about World War II in the Asia Pacific region. Check out the YouTube channel, Pacific Atrocities YouTube channel, and you can watch interesting videos about the subject, and give the organization a follow on Instagram and social media. I highly recommend it.
And one final question. You've actually sort of already answered it in part. When is your book on Manchuria coming out? I believe you said in a month's time or so. And also, what's the title, and where can people look to find it in that time?
It's going to come out, I believe, sometime in mid-September. I don't want to put an exact date on it. I think by September 18th, we're going to do an event to commemorate the anniversary of the incident in San Francisco, and it should be out by then. If not, it will be out shortly thereafter. The title of the book is The Rise of the Kwantung Army, Japan's Empire in Manchuria to 1932. You can find it on Amazon or alternatively on the Pacific Atrocities Education website.
Thank you so much, Quin. Yeah, that really rounds out everything I wanted to ask you, and thank you so much for coming on. You've been an excellent, informative guest on Japan Politics Podcast as well as our first.
Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate your questions and having me on.
Quin, thank you so much, and everyone, goodbye. Thank you for listening.